So let's begin our discussion about the female reproductive system. I do have a cross-section, a sagittal cross-section here going on of a female with a focus on the abdominal pelvic region. In the posterior portion, you can see that rectum and the anus. You can see in between, the next in line, I should say, is this vaginal opening, vagina, and uterus, along with the bladder and that pubis bone right here. If I were to go ahead and switch over to the cartoon version, perhaps we'll see that a little easier. There's the rectum again, the vaginal opening, vagina, uterus, accompanying ovary, as well as just below that, the bladder with the urethra and urethral opening. Some of you might remember our discussion last week a little bit, or from the lab, that indeed that uterus is lying right on top of that bladder. So if you have a child developing, or a fetus, or I should say something developing in there that can kick, we'll say, that it can put pressure on that bladder and can cause bladder incontinence, okay? You're leaking out liquid. So what we're going to do first is look at what is going on primarily into the ovaries and what is supporting these ovaries / all these organs in their location. So first off, we got ourselves the round ligament. You'll notice that this guy is there connecting onto the uterus, and well as the portion of this tube that we'll talk about here in a little while. It's called the uterine tube, but the round ligament's there supporting it, followed by a suspensory ligament connecting the more posterior portion of this cavity to that of this tube, that uterine tube, followed by a broad ligament, which is actually kind of a wrapping around the uterus. And in between those two layers, that wrapping, that pinching off almost like candy, you'll find the blood vessels, you'll find the nerves that innervate there, you'll also find the lymphatic vessels hanging out in there as well. If we were to go ahead, we're going to go ahead and just explore the ovary now. We'll begin with the superficial portions as well as just go a little bit deeper. Starting off with the ovarian mesothelium and into the tunica albuginea. We can go deeper into the ovarian cortex, which you'll notice that there's a lot of different circles, a lot of different colors. These colors, again, are just corresponding to different types of dyes that react with different structures and proteins. And then we can go even deeper into the medulla, which you'll notice here in this little cartoonized version. There is the blood that's going in and out. You'll also notice that some of the nerves go in and all that stuff. Now, these things that are corresponding to these little circles here that are in this cortex are actually the follicles, or the things that can become an infant. Now, there are varying stages. You've noticed that there are different size circles in that, perhaps. You do have a primordial follicle, which can and will develop into a late primary follicle with a chance to become a secondary follicle and onto a mature follicle. How many of those make it there and how great they do it depends. We're going to go ahead and first focus in on the primordial follicle. A primordial follicle is just really easy to start off with. It's just, you can see that right there, there's the oocyte that can become an egg or released out into the uterine female reproductive tract and potentially become a baby. Females, unlike males, only have a limited amount of these cells. Males can continually produce sperm, or their gametes, but females only have 400,000, and they're born with them at the very beginning. They develop in the fetus, and then they pause until they get to, or these eggs pause in development until they get to a level of sexual maturity, or they hit puberty. Once these cells are gone, they're gone. There's no replacing them. If they're gone, this is the point in which women enter into menopause. These things control all the different types of hormones. It controls cycling. It controls everything. If you don't have it, then, well, there's no cycling anymore. And surprisingly, if you think about it, you can go 1 + 1 = 2. There's 12. There's 20 every 28 days a female cycles through, and there's only so many years that a female has. It doesn't add up to 400,000 primordial cells. What really happens here is that only the strongest survive. Quite a few of them, a good 1 to 30 ratio usually. 1 usually survives to 30 that die. Now, it's a competition for resources. It's a dog-eat-dog world, really, in that ovary for these oocytes. It depends on how they allocate resources, how they get food and supplies to be able to grow and survive. And I do need to describe a little bit of what's going on and how the support is given by first describing the different cells that are there to support in these oocytes. First, we got the theca folliculi. These are the things that prep cholesterol to become female hormones. They don't quite do it all the way. That's the job of the granulosa cell. The granulosa cell makes the estrogens, it makes the progesterone, it makes all those other hormones that are important for female cycling and actually these oocyte maturation. We do also have this zona pellucida, which will become really important later on when after the egg hatches and be sent out into the wild blue yonder, that is the female reproductive tract. So each month after puberty, there is FSH and LH that are stimulating these primordial follicles. And once again, usually only one survives this struggle. It really is all competition. Every so often, you do get one. Most of the time, it's just one hatching. But there is a chance for 2 hatching or 3 hatching, hence why you get paternal twins or paternal triplets. There is also a technique that takes advantage of helping these things hatch. This is usually done for people for fertility. Doctor is able to induce via varying types of hormones and other drugs to hatch or release tons of different types, several different eggs, usually about 20. This doctor will collect these eggs and then collect some sperm from the male and insert that sperm into those eggs and then reinsert those eggs back into the uterus in hopes that at least maybe one will implant. Very costly procedure, and it can be most of the time it's not successful. Sometimes it's overly successful. You're putting back 20 fertilized eggs, maybe 19, and 5 or 6 of them, or 7 or 8, can actually implant and grow. That's why you hear of these women with quintuplets, sextuplets, all these miracle babies. Usually it's a result of this fertility treatment. Usually you only see naturally occurring twins or triplets in older females as well, because it's just the follicles are being released at a faster rate, and well, not at a faster rate, but more leniently, let's say, and a lot of them are competing quite nicely with one another. Secondary follicle, I do think it's important to point out 1 or 2 structures of it real quick. You'll notice that some of the granulosa cells have now become corona radiata. They just become specialized and there to support that oocyte. We can move on to the Graafian cell, that mature follicle. You'll notice that this space right here has also developed. It used to be called an antrum in the secondary. It's now become a very nice antrum. I'd almost call it an amphitheater style type of thing, looking at this oocyte. At this point, they will be hatching. If they've developed to this point, it's very unlikely that they wouldn't hatch, or they're not going to degenerate. Hatching is just the more appropriate word for hatching is called ovulation, in which an egg hatches from the ovary. And what's left behind isn't just some type of scar tissue. It's not just some useless remnant. This is the thing that regulates pregnancy at the very beginning for the first 2 months. If the egg is fertilized, the egg says, hey, I need you to keep to this corpus luteum, this guy right here. Hey, I need you to stick around longer. We need to be able to say to mama, we don't want to reject what we've got, so that corpus luteum sticks around. If the egg doesn't fertilize or it's not producing the correct amount of signals, then that corpus luteum will degenerate and the menstruation will occur. Now, unfortunately, I think it'd be an interesting FYI to go ahead and just put this in here. Some females, those poor unfortunate souls, do feel a very painful stimulus at hatching. There are some females that have neurons innervating the different pieces of the ovary that, of a truth, seems unnecessary. So, and because of that, they have nociceptors hanging out here as well. So when this hatching occurs, it's a very painful situation. Again, these mature Graafian cells are the ones that do rupture and leave behind the corpus luteum that does release that progesterone, estrogens, and inhibin to help maintain the body. Here's another wordy slide that y'all can go ahead and take a look-see at later. I would fail you though if I didn't go ahead and mention meiosis and how it works. We had talked in AMP1 that there are two different types of things going on, the mitosis and meiosis. Meiosis only occurring in gametes, gametes being sperm cells and egg cells. So let's hit that up real quick. Make certain you understand that point. They do have mitosis up here. That's just to indicate that the oogonium, the thing that's developing in the fetus, is going to develop about 400,000 cells. And then they become dormant until the female hits puberty. Once they hit puberty, these primary oocytes will go ahead and divide off into a secondary oocyte and shed off a first polar body. These guys aren't going to be viable to be able to be inseminated or even artificially inseminated. They usually just break down. We don't know as a science community what they do, if there has any point to them now, but perhaps we'll find out sooner or later. The secondary oocyte, though, will be released out into the wild blue yonder, and once it binds with sperm, will go ahead and shed off that second polar body, and they can go on to being the zygote, or that fetus that will develop into a baby sooner or later. Here's another example or a picture that helps point out just exactly when this meiosis occurs. You'll notice that during the primary and secondary follicle, that you still have that primary oocyte, but that primary oocyte will eventually split off into the secondary oocyte, and that's when it's considered a mature Graafian follicle. After ovulation, that oocyte goes out. It will bind to the sperm cell. This is a very important note, that the sperm cell does not invade into the ovary. It's impossible for a sperm cell to invade into the ovary. The egg does have to hatch in order for it to be inseminated. Once the egg is inseminated, the second polar body does shed off. We don't know what it does, if it has any benefits to it, but it does eventually degenerate or go away. With that, that is the end of the discussion of the ovary for now. We will be talking about female hormones in a different slide. In this next one, we'll be talking about the pathway of the hatched oocyte. And that is it.